Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. It's 2 months since the Myanmar army overthrew the elected government and arrested the country's most popular leader, and yet the Indian government has had virtually very little to say about this. So today we ask, is it fitting that a country that proudly boasts it's the world's largest democracy should be a silent spectator when democracy is snuffed out in its neighborhood? That's the key issue I shall explore today with India's former ambassador to Myanmar, Gautam Mukhopadhaya. Gautam Mukhopadhaya, as I said in that introduction, it's almost 2 months since the army overthrew the government in Myanmar and arrested the most popular leader of the country. And as far as I can tell, this is the only thing the Indian government has said. India has always been steadfast in its support to the process of democratic transition in Myanmar. We believe that the rule of law and democratic transition must be upheld. My question is simple. Is that sufficient, or is the government's reluctance to say more inexplicable?
Thank you, Karan. Thank you for having me in The Wire. Well, firstly, I think it's not entirely true that that is the only statement that has been made. Subsequently, the government of India did make a statement, a fairly strong, fairly positive statement, in line with the previous statement that you just quoted, in the Human Rights Council. And of course, India was also party to the Quad statement on Myanmar, which made special mention of Myanmar. But yes, it is true that I think since then, there has been a kind of reticence to speak more. And probably this is related to, a little bit of the shadow of 1988 and 1990 hanging over the government at this current state. What the government is probably doing is to assess really which way is this going. In 1990, 1988, it was caught a little flat-footed. The junta, the military regime, was able to impose control in some form or the other. And then we spent the next 20 years more or less trying to restore some kind of relationship with the military government that continued until 2010. So probably they are trying to assess whether this will go, whether the Tamado will once again somehow repress or crush the resistance and restore law and order in effect, or government as well, or whether this will go towards a more full-fledged democracy.
I take your point that the government in Delhi is trying to work out which way the outcome eventually will be in Myanmar. But let me put it like this. Aung San Suu Kyi may be a fallen icon, but her National League for Democracy won an overwhelming majority in a free and fair election. Secondly, she is by far the most popular leader of the country. Is it fitting that a country that proudly and repeatedly boasts that it is the largest democracy in the world should be a silent spectator when democracy is snuffed out in its neighborhood? Because truly, when people think of what has been India's response, deafening silence is the answer that comes to mind.
Well, Karan, I'm not so sure. In this day and age, it is sort of easy to expect sort of quick statements and judgments. As I said, I'm not sure that the government has been totally silent. I think there are at least two strong statements and one statement together with other members of the Quad. And the fact that there has been nothing more forceful since then, in my view, reflects either an ambivalence or perhaps a confusion. I think what we have seen in this period, what I would really have liked to see, is not so much a judgment call on this as much as a statement on the level of violence that the Tamado has inflicted. And there we have been a little silent.
Let's take up that point, because since the 1st of February, when the coup happened, by some counts, over 450 citizens of Myanmar have been shot by the Myanmarese army. In fact, reports say 114 of those were killed just on Saturday. Thereafter, the Myanmar army has publicly declared that it will shoot in the head and shoot in the back protesters who disobey. Is it fitting and becoming that in the face of such brutal suppression, India has nothing to say? Because honestly, on the violence, on the killing, mum is the word from Delhi.
Right. So again, Karan, I'm with you on that. I think the scale of the violence, the nature of the violence, I think they started off a little more, circumspect, but Of late, it has been open, it has been very public, it has been, it has been killing, it has been shooting to kill. This is indefensible, and I would like that the government of India say something about this. But then, the government, and I'm not here to defend the government or to defend the Myanmar military. It's just the way you conduct diplomacy. I think if India wants to keep channels open with the Tamador, for one, even if to convey the message to the Tamador that that they have made a mistake and they should walk back, and that there is no end to what they are doing, they may have to keep their counsel to themselves, at least not make them very public, while it presumably tries to address what it says is its basic position, which is in support of democracy and the restoration of democracy in Myanmar.
Let me again take up on the point. Let me take up on the point you're making. It's not just that the Indian government is keeping its counsel to itself, and that, by the way, is our assumption. We assume it's keeping its counsel to itself. We just don't know. And it's not just that the Indian government has simply failed to say anything about the brutal killings in Myanmar, but worse still, on Saturday, the Indian government was one of 8 countries that was present at the Army Day parade in Naypyidaw, the Myanmarese capital.
Yeah.
That to many is an indication that India, far from criticizing the generals, supports the generals in their suppression of their own people.
Okay, Karan, again, it is not my position to defend the Myanmar army or the governments of India's policy, but let me just explain what the thinking could be. India has made, until now, it has had a dual strategy. It has supported the democratic transition, but it has also dealt with the military. It has dealt with the military in terms of the Myanmar military's defense needs and our own security needs. But it has not supported the military in terms of the political evolution in Myanmar, where our position has been strongly pro-democracy. Now, the Army Day actually commemorates the foundation of the Burmese army during the Second World War. And this became, of course, the Burmese Independence Army. So the symbolism of the Army Day has to do more with Myanmar's defense and its independence, not the fact that, I understand that it can be interpreted like that. And maybe optically it was not a very good thing. But the logic is more to do with what the Army Day stands for. I agree that the timing, timing is very bad.
Yeah. I take your point that Army Day in Myanmar has a huge symbolism, more than just support for the army. But remember something else. Of the major democracies in the world, I'm not talking of the Bangladeshis and the Pakistans, who we don't even count as democracies ourselves. Of the major democracies of the world, we were the only one that was there. Surely, when the major democracies who we ally with and align with, when we claim we are a major democracy, boycott because they don't want to suggest even indirectly support to the Myanmarese government, our presence clearly suggests support or sympathy or understanding. Far from criticizing the Myanmarese army for killing 450 people or for threatening to shoot them in the head or the back, we're there present when they carry out grand parades. And I presume we would have been present at the gala dinner that the army hosted for itself that evening.
Karan, again, let me sort of add a little nuance to this. In the case, if you see the countries that were represented, they were all basically neighboring countries. Bangladesh, to be fair, should not be called an unimportant democracy. It's a very large democracy. Bangladesh was present. So if you see, you're looking at it from the point of view of, countries that were not necessarily very democratic. But if you also see it from another perspective, these were countries that have stakes in Myanmar, mostly neighbors. So that's one point. The second point is that, as I said, that by and large, we have tried to separate the professional relationship with the military from the political relationship with Myanmar, which is, I believe, at least it was in my time, pro-democracy. So I would say that,
Can I put it like this? ASEAN probably has greater stakes in Myanmar than India does. I don't believe ASEAN countries were present on Army Day. Japan has greater stakes. I don't believe Japan was present. There are many other countries that have huge stakes in Myanmar and were not present. But let me raise another point. It's not just
But
that
the Thailand was an immediate neighbor. Laos is an immediate neighbor. Of course, China and Russia are different, but Bangladesh is an immediate neighbor.
But Japan wasn't there. Singapore wasn't there. There were
No,
many
Japan
other
is not an immediate
countries
neighbor.
there.
I think immediate neighbors have certain compulsions.
All right. Except for the fact that there's a big difference between Thailand and India. Thailand has opened its borders to Myanmarese refugees. They're anticipating 3,000 to 4,000 coming across and seeking shelter. India, on the other hand, has given instructions to our northeastern states that border Myanmar, and in particular to Mizoram, that refugees are to be forcibly deported. In fact, the Mizoram government first issued and then withdrew a circular advising against even help and assistance, even advising individual organizations from setting up helping camps. That is an attitude that's hugely different to the Thai government's attitude, which is welcoming refugees.
I totally agree with you. Karan, I totally agree with you. I think the Army Day reception was avoidable. I was only simply trying to explain what was the reasoning behind it. And I think the circular that was issued is completely inexcusable. You know, sentiment in the Northeast, these are basically kith and kin across the border. Sentiment in the Northeast is overwhelmingly in support of, the victims of the repression. And my own feeling is that they will probably deal with it in two ways. Either they will have to withdraw it sooner or later. You know how strongly the Chief Minister of Mizoram has represented against this, or that in actual fact, it will be implemented in a much more relaxed manner. In fact, this is my impression. My information based from the Northeast is that, that the people who have relatives are continuing to get, shelter with their families in India. There was one video of people being sent back. That was probably, a much larger group that did not necessarily have, kinship affiliation in India. But in any case, I think this is a wrong move. It is a wrong move.
The formal position of the government of India, communicated by the Home Ministry to all the northeastern states that border Myanmar, is forcibly deport refugees. Do not let them stay. Do not accept them. Do not shelter them. Do not feed them. That is the formal position of the Indian government. And I want to put this, because I don't want to get stuck on this point, but it's not that we have been very mealy-mouthed in commenting on the overthrow of a democracy. It's not just that we're almost absolutely and completely silent when the army began killing and shooting in hundreds its own citizens. It's not just we formally said to our border states, do not accept refugees, deport them, even though in deporting them they could be jailed and killed. But just look at the context in which this is happening. Not only is Myanmar a neighboring country, it's a critical part of a region where we have aspirations to exercise leadership. And it's probably one of the most important countries where Buddha's message of love and compassion was embraced. And that message came from India. We're so proud of the Buddhism we've sent to the world. Against that bigger, wider background, isn't our response to what's happened in Myanmar even more inexplicable and disturbing?
Karan, I share your sentiments entirely. But, I agree with you. But then again, just let's try and understand what is the difference. In 1988, we had the experience of the emergency not so long back, 1977. We had a very large Burmese exile community. We had politicians who, including, if you remember, George Fernandez, who spoke and who sheltered, exiles from Burma at that time. We had a large population of persons of Indian origin who had come back after, the Burmese Road for Socialism, when they were forced back to India. So there was a big constituency speaking in favor of democracy in Myanmar. Today, I'm sad to say that, we are only seeing this kind of expression amongst the people of the Northeast who do matter. And of course, what I would call is the liberal opinion. I think what has happened in this period is that India has become a much less hospitable country to refugees. And we are seeing this in various ways. I feel
you're saying something much more fundamental and in a sense much worse. You're saying today, mainland India, as opposed to the Northeast, which has kinship and other social relationships with people across the border in Myanmar, mainland India neither understands Burma, or Myanmar as it's called, and has forgotten about it, is quite happy to forget about it. Our association in mainland India has weakened to the point where, frankly, we don't care what happens across the border, whether there's an elected government or an army government, or whether the army is killing its own citizens. It doesn't seem to matter in Delhi. That's much worse.
Karan, I lament that. I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, what has happened is that the ground has shifted. It's sorry and sad. Look at the news media. How much of Myanmar is being covered in the news media here? Compare it with what was happening in 1988 when the External Services Division of All India Radio was actually broadcasting messages in support of the student uprising in Myanmar. Exactly, this is what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that what you perceive and rightly perceive, and I share with you, is a kind of lack of empathy with what is happening in Myanmar. Look. Let's shift the conversation to what the army is doing perhaps a little later. But what has really happened is that the people of mainland India are sorry, let me just go back a little to this. With the military coup in 1962, actually for the first time, India lost that thread, that civilizational thread, that political thread that we had over centuries, even over millennia. And one of the things that always struck me and surprised me about my stay in Myanmar was that how India and Myanmar virtually turned their backs on each other in just 50 years of military rule. And that is why the people-to-people relationship is that much more important, and why we should, in fact, strengthen that people-to-people relationship. And at this point of time, show much more sympathy with the people of Myanmar rather than the military of Myanmar.
The people of mainland India over the last 50, 60 years have lost the civilizational thread and connection that existed for millennia with Myanmar. That connection, that thread has snapped. But let me put to you the explanations that are made in New Delhi to try and justify our weak and timid response. The first is that the Myanmarese army has been extremely helpful to New Delhi in tackling insurgency and separatism in the northeast, and New Delhi believes it is much more important to its interest to ensure that this support continues rather than risk it by championing democracy and annoying the generals. In other words, India's real interest is in making sure that Myanmarese army continues to give us help tackling insurgency and separatism. India's interest does not lie in championing democracy in Burma. How do you respond to that?
I haven't seen that statement if someone has made it. But I would say that even that, that characterization that the Myanmar army has always been helpful or has been generally helpful is questionable, because actually the Myanmar army has played hot and cold with Indian insurgent groups. Of late, they have been more cooperative as part of a much larger, I think, evolution of both the military relationship and the overall country-to-country relationship. So I think India has to follow a dual policy. While we pursue our security interests, they cannot be hostage or they cannot be dumped, or rather our relationship with the people should not be at the expense of the military relationship. Oh, sorry, Karan, can I repeat that, please?
Of course. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that our relationship with the military is important for certain reasons, but the relationship with the people is much more important. And we have to be able to balance the two in a way that reflects that. It is quite possible to show sympathy with the pro-democratic resistance, the civil disobedience movement, while continuing to cooperate with the military in some respects. The present situation is a situation where we have a military coup that I would consider, unconstitutional. Second, you have an elected government that has been voted out. I think these factors are very important. The third is that you have massive military repression. And these are the three issues on which we have to take a position. That doesn't mean that we have to break off relations or channels of communication to tell the junta that they have made a mistake and that if they, that they should walk back. Because frankly, the military junta right now is looking at a cul-de-sac. It is reduced to merely a law and order role. there is no governance, there is no economic growth, there can be no development, there are no investments. They are bartering away Myanmar's future. And I think that is the issue.
And the
That is the
point
message.
and the points you've just made about the junta being reduced literally to a boxed in corner make it even more inexplicable that New Delhi is completely silent. New Delhi's silence, however, is explained on another ground. It's sometimes said that if India were more critical of the junta in Myanmar, it would give China a free run. Our ambivalence ensures that doesn't happen. Do you believe that is a sufficient?
No, I don't. I don't believe that, because China is pursuing its own interests. It's in China's interests to have as vulnerable or weak a Myanmar as possible, so that it can extract its strategic benefits, which are linked to the BRI and the China-Myanmar economic corridor. And China could just as easily conclude that the military regime is dispensable. It had pretty good relations with the NLD as well. And it could, if it feels that the military government or the present military regime is not providing stability that it requires, or the kind of access that it requires, then it could simply change its position, and we would be left high and dry. Therefore, I do feel that India should take diplomatic initiatives. The fact that it has not does not mean that one may not come tomorrow. Karan, that's my only point. My point is this: it's an evolving situation.
Yeah. Let me put it like this. The conclusion that many people inevitably will draw is that India has chosen to prioritize short-term expedient interest over its fundamental constitutional commitment to democracy and human rights. In other words, by failing to stand up for democracy in Myanmar, we are not living up to the very principles we cherish. We're letting ourselves down.
Yes, Karan. Look, as well as I, that diplomacy and political relations are not conducted only on principle, and there are many other factors that come in. If you're saying that we are favoring the military in favor of over democracy, I think that is a mistake, and I certainly hope that the government of India will correct itself. The fact that it has not happened now, does not necessarily mean that we cannot correct ourselves tomorrow.
Of course,
Mr. Mukhopadhaya, exactly.
We can always correct ourselves. No one denies that. No matter how long we persist in adamantly supporting the Myanmarese junta, we can correct ourselves, but the memory of that support will remain, and it might be indelible. Let me point out two things. You know better than me, because you served in Myanmar, that Aung San Suu Kyi never hid the fact that she was hurt, she felt let down when India failed to support democratic forces in Myanmar in the 80s, the 90s, and in the 2000s. Today, when we are once again repeating that, how will the people of Myanmar view us? Will they look upon India as a friendly neighbor that came to their assistance in their hour of need? Or will they say, India chose to put its own interests ahead of supporting us? What sort of friend is this?
Karan, I won't conclude that this is what the people of Myanmar have concluded. What they are seeing is perhaps, they are not seeing an open support for the military. Today, the civil disobedience movement is expressing its anger at China over what it sees as China's role behind the military. We are not seeing.
But the civil disobedience movement in Burma doesn't look upon India as a supporter or a help. They don't look upon us as a bulwark of their interests. We've ignored them. We've turned our back on them if we haven't even shut the door.
Karan, again, I understand where you're coming from. I sympathize with it, but I don't think that would be a fair conclusion. In fact, my information is that the civil disobedience movement is looking upon the antecedents of civil disobedience in India. I mean, it's very much invoking Gandhi. And I think precisely for those reasons, we should, keep, as I said, we have to keep our.
Aren't you being a little clever? No doubt they invoke Gandhi historically because they remember what Gandhi did for India with Satyagraha and non-violence 70, 80 years ago. They are capable of distinguishing between Gandhi and Modi. And it's Modi's government that is not even
Right.
giving shelter to Myanmarese refugees and is insisting
Right.
they be deported, even at the cost of going to jail and death. Surely they'll remember that. Will they think of us as friends, or will they think of us
No,
as people who failed to come to their
Karan,
hour of need?
Karan, I don't defend that. I don't defend that. All I'm trying to say is that this is not the image of India that has permeated into the resistance as yet. Maybe if we continue this way, it might. But that is not the perception in Myanmar of India at
Okay.
the moment.
We're
The
coming to
perception of
the end
India
of
at
this
the moment,
interview.
is
We're coming
still
to the end of this
India.
interview.
India will support democracy.
We're coming to the end of this interview, and 4 or 5 times you've said that you believe that the Indian government may change course, it may change its attitude, it may become more critical, not just of the overthrow of democracy, but of the violent killing of Myanmarese citizens by the Myanmarese army. Where do you get that confidence that there will be a change in the Indian government's attitude? There's no sign of it.
No, no, I don't say that with confidence. What I say is that the ambivalence that we are seeing so far does not allow us to say that they are definitely going to support the military regime come what may. What I'm saying is that they are probably assessing which direction it will go in the light of its experience in 1988. But that the basic sentiment, you know,
I hate interrupting.
right,
You're saying they're
yeah,
basically assessing in which direction it will go. Isn't that
yeah,
already
yeah,
clear? Over 450 innocent protesters have been shot dead by the army. The army has
yeah,
officially announced that it will shoot in the head and shoot in the back protesters it
yeah,
believes are
yeah.
disobeying orders. How much more does the government in Delhi need to see before it decides in which direction it's going? To the rest of the world, it's very clear
Hmm.
what the direction is. Why is Delhi not clear about it?
Um, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think we should speak up. We should speak up privately. We should perhaps also speak up publicly. It's probably not enough to say that we support the democratic transition. It hasn't yet happened. I do hope that it can happen. I don't know where you get the confidence that that we will support the military come what may, that we are somehow behind the repression. I just feel that perhaps we are still groping for a kind of right response.
Well,
And I certainly hope and pray that it
isn't
will
that
be a
even more
response in
sad?
favor of the people. Right.
Isn't that even
Right. Sorry.
more sad, Mr. Mukhopadhaya? 2 months
Yeah.
later, they are still groping for
Right.
the right direction. I mean, I've heard of uncertainty, I've heard of unsurety, but 2 months later, if a neighboring country that is proud of being the world's largest democracy is still groping how to handle a military takeover,
Well, Karan, I'm at a loss to explain myself, and that's the only charitable explanation that I can give. That that they are not sure which way it is going, because everything that you say, everything that I've also said, which is that we must stand by the people, we must stand by a people-to-people relationship, that the military represents not more, at most maybe 5% of Myanmar at this particular time. You have virtually a revolution that is brewing in that country. And I don't think this civil disobedience movement is going to end. It is going to continue for years. There is going to be no relationship, even with the military during this period, if you like it or not. So, in fact, what we should be doing is we should be using what equities that we may have with the military and with other friends that we have in the international community who also have equities with the Myanmar government and with the Myanmar military to try and walk them back, because there is no way out of this. There is no way out of this.
My last question.
Correct.
You've lived, you know the Myanmarese people, and you know their determination, you know their bravery.
Yeah.
But is it possible that they could force the Myanmarese army to restore democracy, or is it inevitable, given the brutal repression, given the unconscionable death toll, that the Myanmarese army will win?
I don't believe the Myanmar armies will win. It's the Myanmar army. I don't believe the Myanmar army will win. This time they have, the Myanmar army has miscalculated time and again. They miscalculated in 1990 when they called elections. The NLD won 80% and more of the votes. They miscalculated in 2015. The Myanmar army again, the NLD won the vast majority of votes, again over 80%. They miscalculated once again. Their biggest miscalculation is that in the last 10 years, the Myanmar people have tasted democracy. They've tasted political freedoms, media freedoms, social media freedoms. They've tasted once again the connection to the rest of the world. And that connection is being expressed today by the Milk Tea Alliance, which is a much larger movement against authoritarianism all over Southeast Asia. I think it will be impossible for the Myanmar army to prevail, even if it conducts a huge purge. And that is why we must come out in support of the pro-democracy movement and for the civil disobedience movement. Absolutely. But the way that has to be done, the way that has to be done.
The words out of my mouth. When you follow the sentence, it's impossible for the Myanmar army to win. With the next sentence where you said, this is why we must support the pro-democracy movement, which is why also the ambivalence we're showing at the moment, the utter damning silence over the killings from New Delhi is a mistake. We should be supporting democracy, we should be supporting human rights, we should be supporting the people, because if it's impossible for the army to win, and the Myanmarese people will emerge victorious, then we're in terrible danger of being.
So that's exactly the call the government has to make. My call is that this is going nowhere. The Myanmar military is not going to be able to reassert control. In effect, you will have a prolonged instability, which is in the interest of no one. And therefore, we should take a call which is much more, forward-looking and pro-people, and do the right sort of diplomatic and other things for it. I have only tried to explain to you why that has not happened. My judgment is very clear on this.
Absolutely.
But why it has not happened could be because we are still...
your point. You personally believe that, in fact, India's interests lie in supporting the people, supporting democracy,
Absolutely.
opposing violence, and our voice should have been heard more clearly, more forcefully, and less equivocally. However,
and we should use whatever little equities we have the military to...
Your explanation that you believe the government is groping, it's still not sure which way it's going to go, is disconcerting for one simple reason. 2 months later, you expect the government in Delhi to have a clear idea and to have made up its mind. And if they haven't got a clear idea, and if they still don't know what they want to do, then that is a pretty damning question mark over our government. But we've gone over all this. We've gone over all of this. Let's leave it there. You've expressed yourself very clearly, and you've raised questions very honestly, which I think the audience will deeply appreciate. Thank you very much for joining me.
And I'm sure they'll make their own conclusions, which I hope are the same as mine.
Absolutely. And they will certainly ponder over that issue. Why is it that 2 months have passed and the government of India still can't figure out what to do, what to say, where to stand, and is in grave danger of ending up on the wrong side? Thank you very much for your clarity. Take care.
Thank you, Karan. Thank you. Good day. Bye.
Thank you, Gautam. Thank you very much indeed.